I was researching a new policy for my good friend and longtime client Jack Palmer when he picked up a photo I had professionally taken of my wife and I for our 25th wedding anniversary 3 years ago. It was obvious that he wasn't listening to me and didn't understand the benefits of this new policy over his old one. So I said, "Jack, is something bothering you? You seem more interested in this photo of Kelly and me than in how this new policy will affect you and your business." Jack smiled as he placed the photo back on my desk and said, "Dawn, you know how lucky you are to have a beautiful wife like Kelly. Most husbands in this town would kill for a wife like that. She sure is great." In our photo, Kelly has blonde hair down to the middle of her back. She had a French braid that day and was wearing a size 4 silver cocktail dress, very conservative and typical of my wife. Slightly rounded neckline, 4 inches sleeves, mid-calf hem, and 2 inches wedge heels. Conservative clothes filled my wife's wardrobe. In all my years in the insurance business, I had never had a client talk about my wife like that, and in some ways I was proud that she was my wife. I knew she still looked amazing, but I wished she was more interested in sex than in all these groups and meetings she was involved in. Thank you, Jack. I feel the same way. She is the love of my life and treats me like a king. I can't believe I've known her for almost 30 years and still love her as much as I did that day. When I first saw her, I was in my second year at university and she was in her first. I saw her and just stood looking at her while she was talking to her friend Emma, and they were walking down the corridor towards me. Her friend was very animated in her way, describing something, and Kelly looked at her and collided with me, knocking the books out of my hands. She leaned over to pick one up, and when she straightened up, she hit me. Jack laughed at the thought of our first meeting. "It's not funny," I exclaimed. "Damn it, Jack, stop laughing." I wanted to ask her out so badly, but I could barely breathe. Kelly kept apologizing, picking up her books over and over again. When she picked up the last one, Emma took her hand and began to lead her away. Not wanting her to leave, I shouted, "You owe me, Don Wilson, 325 West Elm Street." She shouted, "Kelly Anderson," and her friend waved and said, "I'm Emma." "So this is how you impress a girl, huh, Don?" Jack said, trying to suppress his laughter. I sat there trying to come up with an answer. Jack asked, "By the way, Don, does Kelly have a sister or cousin like her in Westchester?" "No," I told him. "Kelly's sisters and cousins don't have much in common with her. Why?" Shaking his head, Jack said, "I swear I saw a hot girl last week who looked just like Kelly, at least in face. But damn, I'd give anything to be the guy she was with." I never suspected my wife of infidelity, but for some reason Jack's statement got me thinking. I turned to him, starting to take notes. "Tell me more about this woman with Kelly's face. What about her hair?" A big smile appeared on Jack's face as he remembered what he had seen and said, "She has a figure like your Kelly, blonde hair, but with a few gray streaks, and she wore it in a bun under a big yellow hat with little white daisies on it. It matched. Her yellow dress was low-cut in the front like a corset, lifting and pushing out her breasts, and her short skirt barely covered her bottom, and when she bent down to pet the lady's toy poodle, you could see her matching yellow panties. The guy with her seemed to be wearing it. Was not her husband, spoiled her, and gave her lots of compliments. He was tall, well-built like an athlete, with a little gray in his hair, well-dressed, probably from Brooks Brothers. We had a lunch meeting, and they were eating not far from us. As we were leaving, I heard him order a pot of melted chocolate to be delivered to room 1242 in an hour. When he said that, Kelly giggled and French kissed him. Then we had to leave. Sorry, Don, but I was fantasizing about your wife all week. I shook my head. Jack, don't worry. Apparently, it's a mistake of identity, maybe a doppelganger. Kelly is too involved in her community groups and church to do what you're suggesting. Now take your new policy and study it if you want. It's a little cheaper than your old policy and has better coverage, especially now that you have the new security system installed. By the way, thanks for the recommendation. I installed their systems here and at home and will be working with them about their insurance and surety. It's a win-win situation for everyone. Jack and I stood up. I shook his hand and walked him out. I asked Sherry, my new secretary, to screen my calls because I needed some time to myself. She smiled and nodded. I looked around the office. It felt more like home since I grew up here. Foremost Insurance and Bonding was founded by my Uncle Thomas. As his business grew, he first hired his son Robert, who he eventually fired for theft, then hired my father Greg, who became his best salesman and partner. When Thomas died, Robert thought half the business would go to him, but his father left 50% to my father and 50% to me. I was only 7 years old, but my fate was predetermined, although I did not know it. All my parents talked about was what I needed to study to take over the business. Mom, bless her heart, basically wanted Dad to retire, so she needed someone to take over foremost. I studied hard and mostly stayed out of partying and getting into trouble. Well, that was until I met Kelly and Emma. God, Emma was wild. When I first met Kelly, I definitely fell head over heels in love with her. I thought I'd try calling her and opened the phone book. I gave her my address in case she wanted to call me, but she hasn't called yet. Looking back, only a few days had passed. I opened the phone book and imagined how many Andersons there were. I didn't know either until I started looking. I started by looking at the addresses, and the obvious business addresses were checked off. Then those in bad areas of the city were crossed out. Knowing it was stupid, I gave pluses to those who lived in the posh areas of the city. Being an idiot, I started calling these numbers. I called, and called, and called, and with sore ears and fingers, he soon found himself on the next set of numbers, the largest. I decided to give my fingers a rest when my mother shouted, "Dawn, you have guests. 2 young ladies are waiting for you in the front room. Come here." Hell, I've never had a girl come to my house before. I ran my tongue over my teeth, put on a clean t-shirt, combed my hair, and sprayed myself with the first cologne I could find before running into the front room. I went from 60 miles an hour to a complete stop when I saw Kelly and Emma there. Kelly stood up and asked, "Do you want to go for a walk?" I nodded. My throat suddenly became dry. Emma followed us. Luckily, there wasn't much traffic in our area, and we walked down the road hand in hand, me in the middle. Kelly apologized for bumping into me, and I told her it was okay. We walked towards the new part of the city, and I asked where we were going. Kelly said, "Relax, I said I owe you a proper apology if you don't mind waiting." She pulled me towards her and kissed me. Emma came up behind me and hugged me. Cars passed by at 45 miles per hour. We're almost to the center of Lawson. "Wait a minute, girls," I managed to say, moving them away at arm's length. "We can't do this in public." Emma smiled and said, "I know," and pulled me along the sidewalk to the porch of this very beautiful house and opened the door. As soon as we entered, Emma closed the door and turned off the alarm. We made love. I continued to go out with Kelly, usually with Emma, and we had a good time. I don't just mean sex. Kelly encouraged me to include Emma in our lovemaking so she wouldn't feel left out. We went to the movies, ice skating, danced, all the fun things you do on dates, just the three of us. Sometimes people looked at us strangely, but we ignored it. After graduation, I went to work with my dad at Foremost, but still dated Kelly and Emma. My parents thought it was strange, but we explained it by saying that they were just best friends. Then, during the Christmas break of her senior year, Kelly became very ill and ended up in hospital. She had a lung infection that didn't respond to antibiotics. She then developed a carnivorous bacterium. We went to visit her. Emma and I stood holding hands and asked to see Kelly, but the nurse said only immediate family was allowed. I said, "I'm her fiancé." The nurse looked at Emma and asked, "Who is this?" Emma burst into tears and ran out of the building. Realizing what I said, I ran after her. I only caught her because of traffic in the second quarter. Hugging her tightly, I buried my head in her neck and asked, "I'm sorry if I offended you, my dear Em. You're my fiancé too. We'll just have to find a priest to marry the three of us." Emma was shaking her head, tears streaming down her cheeks as she said, "Maybe we can, but no government or company or insurance will recognize such a union. I was stupid to think that the three of us could live as a couple. God, I even thought about having your child. You and Kelly will make wonderful children, I'm sure of that. It was like a blow to the head. She was absolutely right. I convinced Emma to come with me to my duplex that evening. The girls usually visited me 3 or 4 times a week, but only sometimes stayed overnight. When we walked in, my phone was ringing. It was Susan, Kelly's mom. She explained that Kelly's condition was very critical and asked for my understanding. She said she would call if Kelly got better or worse. Either way, she figured Kelly would want to see me. I thanked her and told Emma what she said. Emma had this faraway expression on her face and half a smile. She came up to me and gave me a long kiss, then said, "It's time to live for yourself. I think it's time to do a few things that I've wanted to try but have been afraid to. Would you be willing to help?" A little shocked, I said, "Of course, I'll do my best. When do you want to start?" Emma had a mischievous smile and said, "Now, meet me in the bedroom." And she went, taking off her clothes as she went and shaking her cute ass. We made love. I pulled her towards me and kissed Emma softly. "Thanks. You'll make a wonderful wife for some guy," I said. Emma sat down, gave me a strange smile and said, "Not if he likes his women very slutty." "What do you mean?" I asked. I didn't think we did anything so unusual. Emma looked at me rather sheepishly, which was uncharacteristic of her, and said, "I kind of have a date I'd like to take on Saturday, and I need your place. I also need you to be here in case something goes wrong." "What are you talking about that could go wrong?" I asked. Now I was wildly curious. Emma simply said that she needed my presence, and I agreed to be there as a friend. Emma arrived Saturday morning, brought snacks and beer, and cleaned the duplex. She spent the day in the bathroom getting ready. When Emma came out, I whistled quietly. "Thank you, good sir," she said. She was wearing a long-sleeved white silk blouse with no bra. Her breasts were clearly visible through the thin fabric. She wore a long pleated skirt that rose easily as she twirled, showing off her silky thighs. Her red curls were accented with long red nails and red high heels. She put on a rabbit fur jacket and said, "I'll be back soon with my date. Wish me luck." "Do you want me to come with you?" I asked. Emma shook her head and said, "I don't think the Delta Kappa Delta guys would like you coming to their fraternity." Having said this, she walked out the door. I stood there in a fog, then remembered that Delta Kappa Delta is a black fraternity. Is Emma going to bring a black guy here? Is this part of her new plan? Why does she need my presence? In an effort to avoid all these stupid questions, I took a beer from the refrigerator and drank it. It was so delicious that I opened another one. I wasn't sure how many beers I was on when Emma opened the door and introduced me to Michael and Paul. Michael was probably a football player, about 6'5" tall, about 275 pounds, and looked like he could lift a Volkswagen. Paul was probably a basketball player, 6'9", maybe 160 pounds, if not less. They both shook my hand firmly as Emma introduced us. She explained to them, "Don was my boyfriend, and the only reason I'm letting you two have sex with me is so he can watch. You don't have to insult him or make fun of him. Just let him watch and maybe join in. If he wants. Do you understand?" Both agreed. They had sex. Looking at me as if sizing me up for a fight, Michael said, "Emma, remind me why your boyfriend is here looking at us, and why the hell do we have to be polite to him?" I stood up and said, "Emma, Kelly, and I have been a threesome for the last few years, and we have loved each other very much. Unfortunately, the other day a situation arose where I subcon." Looking at me as if sizing me up for a fight, Michael said, "Emma, remind me why your boyfriend is here looking at us, and why the hell do we have to be polite to him?" I stood up and said, "Emma, Kelly, and I have been a threesome for the last few years, and we have loved each other very much. Unfortunately, the other day a situation arose where I subconsciously chose who I wanted to be in a committed relationship with, and it was not Emma. I didn't realize what I said until I saw her leaving, crying and upset. I think she wanted me to make sure that she would find someone who would treat her like a lady and love her as she deserves. Tell me, Michael, could you share Emma with Paul and love her, and not treat her like a woman of easy virtue, except when alone with her or with Paul? Never hit or mistreat her. Love and treat her. Be a good husband, and let her be herself. What do you say? Michael looked at Emma, then at Paul, then said, "Can't we find a footballer who's more like him?" Paul sat seething with anger, but Michael laughed and said, "Gotcha, just kidding." We didn't know that they had been friends for many years. I asked, "Paul, same questions. How do you feel about Emma?" His head dropped, and he sat on the edge of the bed. Emma took his hand. Paul looked at me, sighed, and said, "If I have to choose between sharing Emma or not having Emma at all, I will choose to share her. I love her enough that I'm willing to let her love another man the same way she loves me." Emma cleared her throat. "Another reason I wanted Dawn to watch is because it's one of Kelly's favorite fantasies. I hope one day he allows her to live out that fantasy." As they were about to leave, Michael pulled me aside and said, "I like you, Dawn, and I want to give you some advice. Be very careful if you decide to let your girlfriend play with black men. I've seen many times a white woman, having tried sex with a black man, she never forgets what she experienced with him and usually continues to date black men or boys, with or without the permission of her boyfriend or husband. Be careful, buddy." A few days later, the three of them moved into a nice apartment, and for several years, except for school or work, if you saw one of them, you saw all three. Kelly was unable to receive visitors until the 5th of January and was discharged only on the 12th. During her 3.5 weeks in the hospital, she lost 35 pounds. Her breasts, stomach, thighs, and buttocks were gone. Her face looked gaunt, and she looked so fragile, but her smile when she saw me brought tears of joy to my eyes. I wish her parents would let me go with them, but I waited for them when they pulled into their yard so I could help her into the house. Kelly needed a walker to stabilize herself, as the disease not only destroyed her lungs, but also destroyed much of her muscle mass. She will need a lot of physical therapy. "I missed you so much," I told her. "Did you know that Emma moved into an apartment with Michael and Paul, her two lovers?" Kelly's eyes widened. "Michael and Paul?" she asked quietly so that no one would hear, and then added, "Tell me about them." Then she whispered, "Are they black by any chance?" Looking around to see if her parents were nearby and seeing that we were alone, I nodded. Kelly sighed and rolled her eyes towards the ceiling. I wanted to hug her, but I was afraid that if I did, I might break something. She was so thin. I leaned closer and whispered in her ear, "Isn't this your fantasy?" There was a deafening silence as Kelly stared at me intensely for what seemed like an eternity, but probably only 5 minutes passed before she cleared her throat and said weakly, "Dawn, it was a stupid, drunken, youthful fantasy, and now I realize that's not true. I don't want or need it anymore. I'm just glad you still want this ugly person I've turned into." Kelly, I have loved you since the day I first saw you, and I will love you until the day I die. I told her, "You are sick, and this does not change my attitude towards you. It may have changed your appearance a little, but it's what's on the inside that counts. Do I need a few days so I can push your wheelchair just to help you get around?" Kelly pulled me towards her and kissed me. It was funny, but even her lips felt different. She had lost so much weight. When I got home, I called my dad and told him I needed a few days off to help Kelly. He understood, but my mother was furious. Kelly's parents thought it was really nice of me to help her get around school those first few days. Kelly's physical therapy was fairly mild at first, but soon became intense and very grueling. Her 1-hour session right after school soon turned into 3, and then 4-hour marathon sessions with therapists. By the time she graduated, Kelly hadn't gained much weight, although she had added muscle throughout her entire body. Much to my disappointment, her beautiful big breasts did not return, and neither did that cute ass, now she had none. She had a toned, strong physique with a washboard stomach and barely noticeable breasts. At least her face was a little red, as were her lips. Kelly's parents held a grand graduation party at Murdoch's Steakhouse, and after dinner, first her parents, then relatives and others used a handheld microphone to honor Kelly for both graduating and overcoming her illness. Then someone handed me the microphone. I casually walked up to Kelly and proudly said, "Okay, guys, let's hear this for Kelly." Of course, everyone shouted, clapped, and whistled. Then, pulling a small blue velvet box from my coat pocket, I got down on one knee, raised the microphone to my mouth, and said, "Kelly Marie Anderson, would you do me the honor of becoming Mrs. Kelly Marie Wilson?" Kelly's hands went up to her mouth, and there were screams and cheers, but I didn't hear her say yes or no. Kelly stood there looking at me when Emma ran up to her and squeezed her, and I heard Emma ask her, "What are you going to say, yes or no?" She just stood there for what seemed like an eternity. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, and I feared the worst and was about to get up and leave when Kelly reached out and grabbed the box and nodded, and then said, a little shaking, "Yes, if you want me, your wife." Everything around exploded into a joyful cacophony, and her parents accepted me into their family. We had a good wedding, but Kelly changed after her illness. She has transformed from the wild child she once was, enjoying unbridled sex, into a very conservative and decent girl. But I loved her and made allowance for it. We had been married about 6 months when Emma came over one evening with a large bottle of tequila, margarita mix, and ice. She turned on the blender, and the three of us started drinking for the first time since we got married. Most of the time, it was just small talk about friends and such. Then Emma threw down the gauntlet and said, "I guess you want to know about me, Michael, and Paul, don't you?" Kelly's face turned red. She swallowed hard, then nodded and said, "Is it all we thought it was?" Emma lit up and started telling her friend, "God, Kelly, this is just fantastic. It's even more. Imagine your very, very best sex. Now multiply it by 1,000,000. Now you're probably close to what you'd feel with two fit black lovers. If you ever try this, you will become addicted. I know I will never be able to go back to regular sex again." Then she realized I was sitting across from her and said, "Sorry, Don, I didn't mean." I started to say something, but before I could, Kelly spoke up. I'm perfectly happy with Dawn, and I will never act on it. I love Dawn and plan to be the best wife and mother I can be. Yes, I said mom because I'm pregnant. I didn't know what to say. Kelly and I have talked about wanting to have children, but haven't made a decision yet. This left me confused, and Emma definitely caught the look on my face. Shifting her eyes between me and Kelly, Emma said, "Tell me, Don, how do you feel about becoming a father so soon?" Looking at my wife as if she had some kind of answer for me, I blurted out, "As long as it's mine and Kelly's, I'll love it forever. Why?" Emma started saying, "What if it was Kelly and—" "It's enough," Kelly shouted. "Emma, I think it's time for you to leave." Kelly stood up and walked into our bedroom. Emma headed for the door, and I grabbed her and held her. I kissed the tears that were streaming down her cheeks and then asked, "What's going on between you two, Em? Can you tell me something, or will it ruin our marriage?" Pursing her lips, Em put her arm around my shoulders, kissed me, and said, "Dawn, some things are best left unsaid, and hopefully your fantasies won't come true." Emma then turned and walked out our door, and we never saw her again. I walked into the bedroom, and Kelly was lying on the bed crying. I hugged her and held her. I didn't say a word, I just caressed her hair and shoulder, hoping she'd tell me what was bothering her when she was ready. When Kelly stopped crying, I kissed her, and then I guess I pushed my luck and said, "Ready to tell me now?" Kelly's face flooded with tears as she muttered, "I can't," between sobs and heavy sighs. I just held her and let her cry herself to sleep. I carefully lifted her to the head of the bed and covered her with a blanket. 7 months later, our son, Thomas Gregory Wilson, was born. He was a strong, healthy boy. Kelly wasn't too happy with the name I chose, but as I pointed out, Thomas found it foremost and was also involved in various business transactions back in the early 20s. He also enjoyed playing poker and trading. so much so that he traded and won enough real estate that Foremost now owned over 6 blocks of the city, most of which were leased to government agencies. To be sure, the future looked very bright for the Wilson family. Tommy was only 6 months old when we started looking for a house. I kept looking at Kelly and was surprised how quickly she returned to the sexy woman she was before our son was born. I knew our realtor was clearly paying attention when he thought I was busy with Tommy or in the other room. I had to laugh at the faces he made at her. We found another realtor, a woman this time, and when we sat down for our first meeting, Helen asked, "How many kids are you planning on having? Just so you know how many bedrooms you'll need." I looked at Kelly and her mouth dropped open, looking at me. We then realized that we hadn't really discussed how many kids we wanted since we got married. I knew we could afford a lot with the money we were worth making from potential rental deals. Feeling brave, I proudly said, "I don't know, probably 5 or 6. Kelly looked at me like I was crazy. She opened her mouth and shook her head in disbelief, saying, "I think you'll have to find yourself another wife, because after this big boy is born, I'm not sure I'll ever want another one." I turned to Helen and said, "Sorry, I think Kelly and I really need to talk." Helen sat there, nodding as she put the papers in the closet behind her, not turning to say goodbye. As we walked to the car, I said, "Kelly Marie, when we first started dating, you sat on my lap, looked me straight in the eye, and told me you wanted me to give you 4 or 5 kids. We sat on the corner beds in the house on Jefferson. That was the day Emma got punished for showing her butt to Dr. Manzetto in the lecture hall. You don't remember that, do you?" Now Kelly was showing a side I had never seen. "Kelly," I said, "I never brought up how many kids I wanted. I never said 1, 5, or 10. Where did you get this absolutely perfect idea of 4 or 5? Approaching our car, this ended our conversation about the past, as Kelly's eyes were either on Tommy or elsewhere, but not on me. As we drove home, I broached a decidedly uncomfortable topic and said, "Kelly, seriously, honey, how many kids do you want so we can share our love and life?" Squeezing my hand tightly, Kelly said quietly, "How about we try it when Tommy is about 14 or 15 months old? Hopefully their birthdays will be close to each other. Wouldn't that be fun? We can have one party." "Who knows, Dawn? Maybe I won't ask for the procedure like I told my doctor if I get pregnant again." I felt as if someone had pierced my heart with an arrow. In our parking lot, I picked Tommy up and rocked him, telling him how much I loved him, until I carried him into the house and put him to bed. I loved the carousel lamp Emma gave Kelly at her baby shower. The lampshade rotated, casting images of stars and comets onto the ceiling, while Mr. Sandman or other tunes of his choice played. Tommy and I, of course, loved Mr. Sandman. Tommy was 2 years and 2 days old when Ronnie Lynn Wilson was born. She came into this world screaming, and I swear she never stopped unless she was on the phone or surrounded by friends. Then there was t-ball, pom-poms, football, pajama parties, baseball, basketball, dance, youth groups, church camps, chaperone dances, work, and before I knew it, my kids were grown. Tommy was a high school athlete and a very intelligent student. Ronnie was an extrovert in some aspects, but she was so smart that she had a 4.0 GPA, just like her brother. Thomas received his PhD from the university, and Ronnie is happy with her master's degree. Both are married, Thomas to Casey, and they have 3 children, 2 boys, Donald and Nick, and a girl, Kelsey. Thomas has a PhD in crypto-cybernetics, which is related to the very complex things they do with computers, and Ronnie is into robotics and AI. She is married to Annette, and they have adopted 2 adorable Korean twin girls, Aiko and Mako. Either way, I was very proud of all of them. Kelly and I, well, life was good until about 2 years ago when we stopped having sex. Kelly seemed to immerse herself in all her church, choir and women's groups, and often stayed out late, always seeming too tired for sex. At least I never worried about Kelly cheating on me because I loved her and would never cheat on her. Isn't that how love is supposed to work? Business has been very good, and we've been donating a lot of money to Kelly's charities lately. It was a few months after Jack Palmer's visit when my secretary called me on the intercom. "Mr. Wilson, you have visitors, sir." "I told you to tell people I'm not available. Didn't I?" I said I was a little irritated. "I've been looking at some proposed government contracts." My secretary replied, "Mr. Wilson, they're coming in right now." As soon as I started dialing 911, I saw Thomas walk through the door, followed by his lovely sister Ronnie, who was a copy of her mother. I jumped up from the table so quickly that I hit my upper thigh on the half-open drawer in which I was looking for something. Hell, I don't even remember what it was. I hugged them and hugged them tightly. We moved on to the large, soft leather sofa and armchairs that my Uncle Thomas had once ordered. They were still more comfortable than almost anything on the market today. "What are you children doing visiting an old man?" I asked. Then I realized that they were looking at each other with concern. It looked like someone had died or was about to die. Ronnie took my hand while Thomas found photos on his phone. She had tears in her eyes and said, "Dad, it seems like Mom is cheating on you." Looking first at Thomas, then at Ronnie, I asked, "I'm guessing your brother has evidence on his phone." Ronnie nodded as Thomas closed his eyes. He found the photographs he needed. "Take your time, son. Just take a deep breath and calmly explain." "We will get through this together," I somehow managed to say. "I don't think so, Dad," he said, showing me the photos on his phone. "Dad, my friend Larry, he's in the NFL, and his older brother, who was born to their mother in high school, is very rich and boasted that he was in love with a beautiful married woman. He shared some photos and videos of her with Larry. He wants to marry her, but she says that she does not want to leave her husband. She seems to be very lecherous with him, and he loves her, even told her that he would kill her husband if it would make her feel better. But she replied that she could not live with him if he kills her husband." Then I saw pictures of my Kelly, at first dressed very sexy, dating this well-dressed man. He appeared to be of mixed race. Then photos of them having sex. Then there were other photos of him opening the door to let two other men in. I covered the screen with my hands and Thomas put his phone away. He pressed a few buttons and said, "Dad, I know this hurts, but I think you need to hire a detective to check on Mom. I just sent a copy to your phone and company email. Your detective and lawyer need a copy." Ronnie added, "That's why a detective is a good idea. Maybe it's just someone who looks a lot like Mom." We hugged, and they left. Then I remembered the company that installed our security system, AOA Security. Their specialist who screened the installers when they did their last update with the motion cameras told me that they have 4 licensed private investigators who primarily do background checks, but are available to work on fraud or divorce cases. When the operator answered, I asked for Manny. I heard him say, "Hello." "Hey, Manny," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "This is Dawn. Dawn Wilson. Yes, the one from Foremost. Look, first I wanted to ask, where is the security recording equipment in my house? I've never seen it." "Oh, my wife knows." "Well, she says that doesn't know. Can you ask the technician who installed it to call me and tell me where it is and maybe walk me through his work? If my wife doesn't know where it is, she clearly doesn't know how to use it." "Thank you. I'll wait for his call." "Okay, now about hiring a private detective." Manny asked, "Why do you need it?" "Manny," I said, "that's why I asked for a private investigator. Please have him come to my office or call me so we can meet." Now all that was left was to wait. An hour later, my secretary informed me that I had a visitor who only told her that I had requested one. I told her to let him in. This rather inconspicuous gentleman walked into my office and, without saying a word, took an electronic device from his case and walked around the room, checking its readings. Once satisfied that they were correct, he turned to me and said, "Mr. Wilson, Manny sent me. I'm Pete Locke. What can I do for you?" "Manny said you didn't tell him on the phone. I'm guessing it's either your wife or your girlfriend, so what?" My words got stuck in my throat. I cleared it several times and was finally able to say, "Pete, first of all, please call me Dawn. Next, I have a suspicion that my wife is cheating on me, and I need you to check it out. She is a famous person. in our community, so we need to keep it as quiet as possible. I don't want this to become public knowledge if possible." I then told him about what Jack Palmer said about seeing a woman who looked like Kelly a few months ago, and how my kids showed me videos and pictures of a woman who looked like their mother having sex with this very large, a mestizo who shared it with friends. I also talked about his offer to kill me so that she would be free. I handed Pete a flash drive with copies of the photos and videos that Thomas had given me, plus I made copies of several photos of Kelly that I had in the office. "Don't worry, Don," Pete said. "If there's something that needs to be found out, I'll do it. By the way, Garcia said your security system is in that secret alcove you can open on the stairs leading to the old garage in the back of your house. You know, where you need to turn the middle coat hook. As for how it works, it's a computer, so just open it up, and there'll be a tool icon in the top right corner, and it'll walk you through everything you need to know. We've lived in this house since Ronnie was born, and I never knew about the secret room, or even remembered that we had an old garage in the back. I remembered the agent telling me that the original house had partially burned down and was torn down and a new one built in its place, which we bought. I was busy and Kelly was with Helen during the house purchase. Pete asked for my cell number, I gave it to him, and he handed me his business card with his cell number written on the back. He also asked if I had a hidden key to our house, and I told him where it was. I started to tell him the security code, but he laughed, reminding me where he worked. When Pete left my office, I checked my calendar and Kelly's schedule. She has choir rehearsal tonight. She will be out from 7:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. or later. I decided to look for that very secret room. When I returned home, I found that Kelly had prepared dinner. Chinese food from crazy Asian restaurant. We sat down to eat, and I wondered if my wife, with whom I had lived all these years and who had stopped having sex 2 years ago, was capable of having crazy sex with other men right under my nose. I only ate half of what she gave me. "Is something wrong, my dear?" she asked, taking my hand lovingly. Part of me wanted to pull my hand away in disgust, but I restrained myself. "No, honey," I replied. "I just have a lot to do. You don't have to worry about it." Kelly put away the rest of the food and went upstairs to get ready for choir practice. As soon as she left, I started looking for that very secret room. More than an hour passed, but I found nothing. I decided to reconsider my steps, and when I returned to the large pantry at the back of the kitchen, I noticed that there were visible marks on the floor where the vacuum cleaner had been. I moved the vacuum cleaner and found a door handle under the apron. Opening the door, I found the light switch. The stairs led down, so I went down. About 10 feet below, there was a platform with coat hooks. I grabbed the middle hook and turned it, and the wall moved to reveal a decent-sized room. Feeling for another light switch, I couldn't believe my eyes. On one of the walls hung all kinds of very sexy dresses and high heels. I walked over to the dresser. It was filled with sexy lingerie that I had never seen Kelly wear. And then I saw it that big yellow hat with white daisies that Jack had so vividly talked about, next to the yellow dress. A dressing table full of all kinds of cosmetics, powder, lipstick, foundation, and other products that modern women use to attract men. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I found our security system and was able to access the video footage of the house. Several of them showed Kelly walking around the house in very sexy, even slutty clothes, although none of the footage showed her entering or leaving the house in this manner. After I transferred all the security footage to my work computer, I took a few photos of the room on my phone and closed it as I continued down the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs was a big old garage with a red Miata and a big white Lincoln parked there. I checked and both were registered to Kelly Anderson at a different address. I took pictures of the registration and cars, then returned to our house. At least in what had once been my home, I now wanted to live somewhere else. It was only 21 o'clock, and I returned to the kitchen. I knew that Kelly usually doesn't get home until 11:15 or 11:30 p.m. What was I going to do for 2.5 hours? I decided to pour myself a drink and sat down at the counter on one of our high-bar stools, twirling my wedding ring on my finger. My glass was covered in condensation because I didn't touch it. I was afraid that if I started, I wouldn't be able to stop and would do something I'd regret. Kelly returned around 11:15 p.m., and I took off my wedding ring and drained my glass. I went up to our bedroom, quickly undressed, and waited for Kelly in the bathroom. I turned on the hot water so it would be ready when she arrived. 11:27. Kelly walked into our bedroom and, without looking at the bed, walked into the bathroom, humming a song and taking off her clothes. I noticed that she was not wearing panties. She picked up her dress from the floor and hung it on the heated towel rail. I snuck up behind you. Kelly tried to jump, but I held her tightly, whispering, "Not today, my love. You're mine, my sexy vixen." Smiling like a Cheshire cat, she said, "Dawn, where have you been hiding this all this time?" "Honey, this has always been here for you. You just haven't been interested lately." Despite the pain of her cheating, I wanted to win her back, but she tried to push me away. "No, Dawn. Please, I need to wash myself," Kelly screamed. "Don't do this, Dawn. Please, you don't understand." 2 years without sex was unbearable, and I couldn't stop. The shower didn't hide the tears running down Kelly's cheeks, and I hoped it hid mine. I pressed my head against her chest, wanting to scream at her, demand an explanation, punish her. But damn, deep down I still loved her. At least I wanted to love her. Finally, Kelly pushed me away and asked, "What's gotten into you tonight? You're not acting like your usual self. Do we need to talk?" She looked at me the way children look when they are lying but are trying to convince you otherwise. I reached for the shower door and said, "Kelly, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's been 2 years since we had sex." Today I was on the edge. I would either take you or find a woman of easy virtue, and I would prefer you even if you have changed. I walked out and heard her crying while I was drying off and getting ready for bed. Kelly didn't sleep with me that night. She slept in one of our guest rooms. Over the next few weeks, I received silence from Kelly. I don't think she said 10 words to me during that time. Then early Monday morning, I received a call saying I needed to come to Middleton to check on the damage caused by an explosion in one of our rental buildings due to a broken gas line. Part of the building has disappeared. I quickly got dressed and got into the car. I was going 70 miles per hour on the highway when a big truck cut me off. I hit the brakes and the pedal went to the floor. Nothing. I pressed and pressed, but there was no brake. I quickly moved into the middle row, and the truck cut me off again, almost hitting the bumper. Luckily, I remembered to slip into second gear and slowed down the car. Then low gear, neutral, and to the side of the road where I applied the handbrake. The truck also stopped in front of me. Luckily, a state trooper pulled up behind me, wanting to know what happened, and I told him my brakes had failed. He asked to open the hood, and I noticed that the heavy truck had flown back into the traffic. The patrolman came out from under the hood, shaking his head, and said, "Dude, someone wants to kill you. Your brake lines were cut." I saw his name, Sergeant Jones. He went to his cruiser and talked on his cell phone for a long time. When he returned, he said, "Mr. Wilson, we've called a tow truck to take your car to our forensics department. We're hoping we can find fingerprints or other evidence as to who did this. Can I give you a ride or call a taxi?" I said I could handle it myself. I called the office. It turned out that there was no damage to the gas line and reported it to the patrolman. He said he would inform the officers from the detective department and someone would contact me. I was afraid to tell him that my son was saying that my wife's lover was threatening to kill me so that it would be easier for her to be with him. I took Paul's business card out of my wallet and called him. He agreed to pick me up in 20 minutes. Half an hour later, we were sitting in a cafe opposite my office. The waitress had just filled our cups with coffee and taken our orders when Paul pulled out a large folder from his worn brown briefcase. Don, he said, shaking his head. "I should have warned you. Warren Legard is bad news, and I should have seen it coming. He tries to convince people that he's a reputable businessman, but he's earned his millions in the sale of illegal substances, money laundering, sex, car theft, and any other scams. It turns out that Warren came to this Michael because Michael worked for him as a courier as a child, and found out that he was living with this white girl, Emma, and another black man, Paul. During the meeting, your Kelly came over, and he became interested in her and insisted on meeting until she agreed to dinner. He took her on his private jet to New Orleans for shrimp and grapefruit champagne. I think that's it. And it began. The romance has been going on for 2 years now. I reached for the folder and Paul asked, "Dawn, do you really want to see this?" Tears started to fill my eyes and I said, "No, but I have to." And I opened the folder. It contained photographs and memory cards. The photographs showed Kelly doing things that were even worse than what my son showed me. After flipping through the stack of photos and closing the folder, I asked, "What's on the memory cards?" Paul said, "Videos taken by me and my operatives. I don't know if you should watch them, but your lawyer will need them. Dawn, I think you should call Manny and hire some security for yourself, at least until the divorce is finalized." After paying for the coffee, Paul drove me to the rental office, but on the way, when we passed a Chrysler dealership, I asked him to stop. I went in and bought a new Charger Hellcat, thinking if they were going to come after me, they better give it a try. Damn, this thing is fast. Back at the office, I called a few friends who had gone through divorce and asked who the best attorney was. The two recommended the lawyer who represented their ex-wives, Sarah Hunter. I called her office and found out that she had an opening at 2 p.m. I then called Manny and asked about hiring a security guard as recommended by Paul Locke. He said someone would meet me at Miss Hunter's before I left. I called my accountant and we started looking for ways to protect my assets. At 2 p.m., I was in the office of Miss Sarah Hunter, a lawyer. She was an attractive woman with reddish-brown hair, brown eyes, and a well-built body. She stood up and extended her hand to me. "Mr. Wilson, how can I help you?" she asked, pointing to the chair in front of her desk. Nervously holding the folder in my sweaty hands, I said, "Miss Hunter, please call me Dawn. My wife of 28 years has been cheating on me for 2 years. This morning, I'm pretty sure her lover tried to kill me. He told my wife he could kill me so they could be together. I recently found out about the affair and am devastated." She looked at me for a long time, then said, "Please, call me Sarah. How did you know your wife was cheating?" I handed her the folder. Sarah's face spoke volumes. She then inserted one of the memory cards into her computer. Her mouth dropped open in surprise as she looked. I saw her squirm in her chair with discomfort. She then pulled out the memory card and called her secretary. Sarah inserted a second card as a young blonde entered the room, nearly breaking her neck looking at the screen. After a few minutes, Sarah took the card out of the computer and said, "Dawn, this is my assistant Crystal Porter. She will help us with the paperwork and anything else we need. You can consider her questions as questions coming from me." She then handed the folder to Crystal and told her to make copies and return the folder to me. I noticed that Crystal was blushing from watching the video. We spent the better part of 2 hours discussing what the law required and allowed and what I could expect. Luckily, Foremost was a corporation and Kelly couldn't lay claim to it. She could have half the house and half our bank accounts, including our eras. At this moment, Crystal knocked on the door and said, "Miss Hunter, there is a gentleman here who wants to see Mr. Wilson." Sarah told her to send it. A very handsome young man walked in, extended his hand to me and said, "Don Wilson, I'm Stephen Dahl. I'm your bodyguard. Manny sent it to me." I swear Sarah and Crystal looked at him like they wanted him for themselves. Sarah shook my hand and said she would contact me as soon as the paperwork was ready to give to Kelly. Stephen followed me into the office, and as soon as I got out of the car, he was next to me. He followed me very closely, and I felt that he was being too protective when suddenly he pushed me into the juniper bushes just as 2 shots rang out. A passenger in a plumber's van parked on the side of the road pointed a gun at us, and Stephen pulled his and shot it out the back window as the van tried to pull out into heavy traffic, but hit the passenger. Stephen turned to me and yelled, "Call 911. I immediately called and told the 911 operator, "There's a shooting. Someone tried to kill me. My bodyguard killed one of them, and I'm not sure about the driver. Please send someone to Foremost Plaza." Yes, I'll stay on the line. Almost immediately, I heard sirens coming from different directions as Steven stood guard in case there was another team nearby targeting me. Soon there were police everywhere. They cordoned off the area and discovered that the driver had been shot twice. The paramedics were administering oxygen to me when two detectives approached. They opened their badges and the eldest said, "Johnsy said that you were in trouble this morning and that we should visit you." I think we should have taken his words more seriously, don't we? Looking at his partner. Why don't we go inside where we can talk more privately? They helped me up and all four of us went to my office. As soon as we walked in, my secretary Sherry ran up and hugged me with tears in her eyes, saying, "I'm so glad you're alive. I thought we lost you." Damn, I didn't know she cared so much. At my office, they introduced themselves as Tom Baker, SR, and Tony Noddle. Tom took over. "Mr. Wilson, Patrolman Jones told us that your brake lines were cut and that someone seemed to want you to get into a fatal accident. And today someone tried to shoot you. You can ask, why does someone want you dead?" My throat was dry and tears flowed like Niagara Falls. Stephen handed me a box of tissues while Tom and Tony stood looking at me and finally said, "Mr. Wilson, we don't have all day. Should we call your doctor to give you something to calm you down?" Wiping my tears, I was able to say, "Sorry, officers. I just found out that my wife has been cheating on me for the last 2 years with what I believe is an ex-gangster, and he asked her to marry him. She told him she didn't want me. Leave because it would hurt me a lot. He said he could always kill me so she wouldn't have to worry. At that time, she told him that she wouldn't marry him if he killed me, but now I'm not sure that she will. I haven't changed my mind." Officer Noddle was writing on a notepad and asked, "Who is this supposed gangster, and do you have evidence of your wife cheating?" Gathering my courage, I said, "Warren Legard, look at this," throwing them a folder. The two officers opened the folder, and their eyes widened to see my wife having sex with Legard and his friends. There were several clear shots of Legard's face, leaving no doubt about his identity. Officer Baker spoke up. "Mister, perhaps we can plant him. Don't get your hopes up. He's as slippery as an eel." Stephen stood behind me with his hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry, Mr. Wilson. I'll be here to protect you." The officers handed me their business cards and said they would contact me. As they began to walk away, Officer Baker turned and said, "By the way, Doll, great shooting today. We miss you in the department." His grin said it all. I looked at Stephen and asked, "So you were a cop? Why did you leave the department?" Stephen smiled and said, "Well, one morning I was working with the other detectives, and I got a call that I was expecting in the commissioner's office. The other detectives were making fun of me, saying it was either a promotion or a dressing down, and asking what I had done. I had no idea. I walked into his office and was shown inside where he was sitting at his big desk looking very angry. He didn't ask me to sit down and asked if I knew Ashley Baker. I said I didn't remember that name. He blushed and said that Ashley is his stepdaughter and that I made her pregnant, and I must marry her to make her an honest woman since he does not want him to have an illegitimate grandson. I asked him when he thought it happened, and he said Ashley said it was at a party when one of the detectives got his gold ID. Then I remembered that there was a pretty girl at that party who I was in the driver's seat with, and she asked me if I wanted her. I said no, but she pulled me into the bathroom and tried to have sex with me. But I refused. I looked at the commissioner and told him, "Sir, I don't. I think I'm going to marry your stepdaughter. I'll wait for the paternity test results because I don't think she can get pregnant without having sex with me. You'll have to ask one of the other guys at the party who slept with her next." At that moment, I was suspended from work without pay, and I had to quit. I received a private detective license and have never regretted it. Smiling at Stephen's confession, I called Sarah, my lawyer, and told her about the second attempt on my life and asked her to serve the divorce papers on Kelly as soon as possible. She asked if I knew where she was. I checked her schedule and saw that she was supposed to be at the Senior Care Center this evening from 6 o'clock to 11 o'clock. Sarah said that she would be given documents there. I also called to change my garage door locks and codes. This included a secret lower garage that I recently learned about. Sarah called me around 10 o'clock. She said when their server arrived at the senior care center, they were informed that Kelly had not been seen there for months, maybe even years. I couldn't figure it out because I was sure Kelly filled out her schedule so I knew where she was. I told Sarah to have a server waiting for her at our front entrance. I'll pay for overtime if required. At 11:30, the doorbell rang and drumming began on the door. It was Kelly. She was furious. I refused to open the door, and she screamed, "Donald Wilson, open this door now. Why are you filing for divorce? Why won't you talk to me?" Stephen stood next to me, his calming hand on my shoulder. I stood there for a minute and then said through the door, "I don't need you. Go back to your lover, Warren. Tell me where to send your things, okay?" Kelly screamed, "No, Dawn, I love you. It was just sex with him, honestly." I turned around and left. My cell phone rang, and it was Kelly. I just turned it off and went to the kitchen to pour myself a drink. I poured myself a glass of 4 roses with ice. I suggested it to Stephen, but he refused, saying he didn't drink on duty. I heard Kelly trying to open other doors and windows around the house, begging me to let her in, but I didn't give in. After drinking my glass, I went up to our bedroom, and as I lay down, I wondered if she had brought him here. I got up and went to one of the guest rooms and made a mental note to buy a new bedroom. Stephen and I went to Denny's for breakfast. It was more for him. I only drank coffee. My stomach was in knots like I'd been on a roller coaster too many times. When we got to the office, my secretary Sherry came up to me, hugged me, and said, "There are 2 men here who insisted on meeting with our accountant this morning. One of them is from the Internal Revenue Service, the other was here before, but I don't remember him." Name. I walked into the accountant's office, followed by Stephen. Betty Scholes worked for us for many years and was just typing something for Pete and another man when she noticed me. Shaking her head, she said, "Sorry, Dawn. I should have noticed this a long time ago." Then the other man turned to me and introduced himself. "Ivan Crow, Mr. Wilson. I'm an investigator with the Internal Revenue Service. Pete asked me to look at your charitable donations to your wife's foundation." A little stunned, I asked, "Is there a problem? I donated with pure intentions. Can you explain what's going on?" Ivan and Pete looked at each other for what seemed like an eternity, but in reality it was seconds. Then Ivan picked up one of the printouts from Betty's printer. He handed me a piece of paper with a check for Christian choir charities in the amount of $150,000. "Is there something wrong here?" I asked. Pete said, "Look at the back. Look who cashed it." I looked at the bottom of the paper, where the back of the check was shown. My throat went dry when I saw that it had been deposited into WLG Charity Distributions and signed by Kelly Anderson. I crumpled the paper in my hands. "I don't understand," I said. "Are you saying that the checks I wrote to Kelly's charities bounced?" Pete shook his head. I looked at Ivan and asked, "So what penalty do I face for deducting this amount of money from my taxes, thinking I was donating to charity?" he said. "As far as we can tell, only 2 people withdrew money, Warren and Kelly, so you probably won't get anything. It could affect your taxes, and you'll have to file an amended return for those years." Ivan looked at me and said, "Mr. Wilson, you honestly believed that you were donating to a real charity, didn't you?" I nodded. "Well then, if you agree to testify against them, I will try to get the fine dismissed. I'm not sure, since it is a very large amount. Do you realize that over the past 2 years you have donated almost $4 million to these fake charities? Your wife and Mr. Legard is facing serious federal charges for tax evasion. I'll bring an assistant and we'll go through your books for the last few years to make sure there are no more violations. I also need your personal tax information. Can you bring it tomorrow?" Before I could answer, Betty said, "Mr. Crow, I have the Wilson family's personal tax records for the last 10 years. Would you like to have it now or tomorrow?" I left the men in Betty's office and went to my office. I sat in silence, trying to comprehend everything. My wife not only cheated on me, but stole from me and the company to live out her fantasy. Suddenly, tears began to stream down my cheeks just as Sherry walked into my office. She came up to me, handed me a box of tissues, and hugged me. When I finally caught my breath, she said, "Sir, there is a woman here who wants to see you. She says her name is Emma Knox." Damn, I didn't want to see her now. My emotions were on a roller coaster, but I decided to give her a chance to speak up and told Sherry to bring her, but to remain nearby as a witness. Sherry soon returned with Emma. Emma ran up to me and hugged me tightly. Her cheeks were stained with tears. "Dawn, I'm so sorry it turned out this way. If I had known this would happen, I never would have introduced Kelly to Warren. I thought she'd just get a little divorced and then come back to you like a happy wife." She came to me and told the whole story, at least I think so. She was quite unclear at some points. "Can't you forgive her? Is it really necessary to get a divorce?" I opened the desk drawer, placed a folder in front of her, and began flipping through the photos one by one. Emma turned away, tears now streaming down her cheeks. I closed the folder, stood up, and said, "Her lover tried to kill me twice. It's a miracle I survived because of him," pointing at Stephen. I didn't want to tell her about the fraud she committed until Ivan had the warrants ready, which he said would take a day or two. Emma's lips trembled as she headed towards the exit. On the threshold, she whispered, "I'm sorry," and left. The next 2 days were hell. I was waiting for it all to end. Opening the morning paper while sitting at the kitchen table across from Stephen, I saw on the front page photographs of Kelly and Warren after being arrested by the Internal Revenue Service for tax evasion, fraud, theft, and attempted murder. I blocked Kelly's number on my cell phone, but Ronnie's number came up, so I answered. "Hello, beautiful. To what do I owe this honor?" I asked my beloved daughter. "Dad, did you have to arrest her? Wasn't divorce enough?" she said. "Sorry, honey, it's not me. It's the IRS. She forced me to donate money to fake charities that didn't exist for the last 2 years so she and her lover could live a luxurious life. It cost me almost $4 million, I said. "Crap," my daughter screamed. "What did she do with all that money?" "Ronnie," I said, "I'd like to know. You'll have to ask her when you see her. Her hearing is scheduled for this Thursday in federal court. I'm not sure if I'll go. Starts at 1 o'clock. Ronnie said she'd be there. I entered the courtroom at 1 p.m. and found Thomas, Casey, and Ronnie sitting together, so I joined them. The bailiff told us to stand as the judge entered, then we sat down. Warren Legard and Kelly were soon brought in, handcuffed and wearing orange jumpsuits. When the handcuffs came off, Kelly saw us sitting there and smiled. Tommy raised his glasses, giving his mother the middle finger. She quickly turned to the judge. After reading the charges, the judge reviewed Warren's record and ordered him held without bond, and he was taken back to his cell. Then Kelly was brought in. The judge asked her why she decided to steal money from her husband's company for herself and Mr. Legard. She played a good actress and said, "Your Honor, Mr. Legard convinced me that if we did it his way, we could donate money to charities all over the world, not just locally." The judge then reviewed the Internal Revenue Service records and said, "Mrs. Wilson, according to records, WLG Charity Distributions never donated money to any charity. All money was spent on travel, clothing, food, and significant amounts were withdrawn in cash. I suspect they were used in his illegal substances. You wrote many of the checks yourself. How do you explain this?" Kelly stood there thinking for a few minutes, then said, "Well, Warren said that we, as managers, are supposed to use some of the money for ourselves. I thought he was donating to charity." The judge shook his head, not believing a word. Without looking at her, he looked at the stenographer and said, "Bail is set at $4 million. Kelly's knees buckled, and the bailiff held her down. She turned to me and said, "Dawn?" I just shook my head and left. The kids followed me, and we all went to lunch. There was little talk of Kelly at dinner. 2 months later, Ivan Crow called me. "Dawn, for some reason the prosecutor decided to move Kelly's case. Can you come tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, same courtroom as before?" I said I'd be there and called the kids. Just before 9, we were all there waiting for Kelly to come in with her lawyer. This time she was wearing a nice pantsuit and her hair was more groomed. The judge turned to her lawyer. "I understand that your client wants to change her confession." Her lawyer cleared his throat and said, "Yes, Your Honor, Mrs. Wilson wants to plead guilty to all counts against my advice." The judge, looking at Kelly over his glasses, said, "Mrs. Wilson, you understand that by pleading guilty, I must sentence you as if you had been found guilty by a court, don't you?" Kelly nodded, then looked at us sitting there holding hands. The judge asked his clerk for a copy of the sentencing guidelines. After he wrote something down on a piece of paper, he turned to Kelly. "Mrs. Wilson, on the charge of attempting to evade taxes by concealing funds, I sentence you to 20 years in federal prison, to be determined by the court at a hearing in 2 weeks on the charge of grand theft. I sentence you to no less than 7 and no more than 15 years, the sentences to run consecutively. On the charge of conspiracy to murder your husband, I sentence you to no less than 10 and no more than 20 years, the sentences will be executed consecutively." Kelly's jaw dropped, and she muttered, "THTH 37 years. I'll be an old woman. I never planned to kill Don. I was just kidding when I said that if he died, I wouldn't have to get a divorce. I want to change my ways." Confession. The judge said, "Sorry, your confession is already recorded in the protocol." He then said, "Off the record, Mrs. Wilson, after reviewing all the facts of this case, including the divorce papers, I was hoping I could give you more time. You deserve it." Then he leaned back, struck his gavel, and said, "Bailiff, take Mrs. Wilson back to her cell. The hearing is over." Another month passed, and we had a divorce hearing. The case was heard by a clerk of the court, not a judge. Kelly was brought from prison. She was wearing a gray jumpsuit with "prisoner" written in bright orange on the front and back. The administrator quickly reviewed the documents and said to Kelly, "Well, it looks like you won't need much for the next 37 years because the feds will take care of all your needs. You're divorced now." Kelly tried to tell me that she still loved me, that Warren meant nothing to her. She said it was just sex. I said, "Kelly, if you really loved me, you would never cheat on me or steal money from our company. Not only did you sleep with him, but you also denied me, your husband, any affection other than the occasional kiss on the cheek or a half-hearted 'I love you.' Did you know that some of our friends found out about the affair before I did, and our son brought me the photos before I could even believe it?" Before she could respond, the guard told her it was time to go. He told me we could talk during visiting hours, and she begged me to come. I had no desire to visit her. My love for her has died. Almost 6 months later, Warren Legard's trial began. They proved that the 2 men who tried to kill me worked for him, and that the van they were in belonged to him. That gave him 25 years to live, and when they added 20 for tax fraud and another 10 for grand theft, it looked like Warren Legard would die in prison. They were also able to prove that he used the money that Kelly and he stole from me to buy several properties, and I filed a claim and was able to get title to them and also get back about half of the stolen money that was still in theirs account. Luckily, he had enough legitimate businesses that I was able to file a claim against his estate and recover all the stolen money as well as my legal fees. This barely made up for my loss. I was lonely and suffering. I went to work, often skipping lunch. After work, I would go to the gym and train until I was exhausted, then stop at Panera Bread for a salad or soup, sometimes Subway, and then come home to an empty house. I often worked 7 days a week just to avoid being alone in this empty house. I gave all of Kelly's things to the thrift store except the ones Ronnie wanted. Tommy wanted nothing to do with his mother. The cars and condos registered to Kelly were seized by the IRS, which made my life easier without having to deal with them. Honestly, I should have paid someone else to pack that damn yellow dress and hat. It really hurt as I shoved them into the big black trash bag, remembering what Jack Palmer said. I rarely slept, often tossing and turning, having nightmares of Kelly and Warren having sex. Then, one Friday evening, Emma came to my house. She stood there in the light rain, and I wasn't sure if I'd let her in. Her bottom lip trembled, and she said, "I guess you hate me, huh? I guess I ruined everything, didn't I? I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it, but I invited Emma into the living room and we sat across from each other. I just looked at her and didn't say a word. She wrung her hands and said, "You're making this really damn hard." I just shrugged, looking at her. "Can I have a glass of water, Dawn?" she asked. I got up and went to the kitchen and took the bottle out of the fridge, and when I turned around, she was standing right behind me, hugging me. It brought back memories of the times we were together. Then I remembered Kelly and pushed her away and sat down at the kitchen table. I was able to say, "Emma, sit down. It looks like you have come to say something or free your soul. Please speak or leave. I once loved you very much, and now I am very sad, having lost two of the most wonderful women in my life." A smile lit up her face, a tear rolled down her cheek, and she said, "So you really loved me, didn't you?" I nodded. "Dawn, I can't imagine how devastated and betrayed you felt after Kelly cheated. She'd been pestering me for weeks about what it would be like to be with Michael and Paul, and I thought, what if I introduced her to a gentleman like Warren for a little fling? She'll have fun and then come back to you as your loving wife. I really didn't know what kind of person this person really was. I also didn't realize that she would turn into that. I was in so much pain all this time. And I know you probably hate me, don't you?" I couldn't answer her for a long time. My mind was in turmoil. Kelly wanted to fulfill a fantasy that, if left alone, she could have a one-night stand and come back to me. But Emma introduced them. Taking a deep breath, I said, "Emma, I can't say I hate you, but I don't love you either. Kelly had a fantasy, and if she acted on it one day, she might come back to me. But she seemed to have fallen in love with him, or what he gave her, which I couldn't. Now we're all paying, and I'm asking you to leave." Emma started crying as I stood up, helped her up, and walked her to the door. She stopped and turned to me as if she was going to say something, but I closed the door in her face without saying a word. It hurt too much. The next morning, after shaving and showering, I got dressed and was getting ready for work, as this empty house was suffocating me, when the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there stood Sherry, my secretary. She was wearing tight running shorts, a sports bra and sneakers, with her long red hair pulled back into a ponytail. She was covered in sweat. Obviously, she had been running hard. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson. Why are you dressed up like that? Are you going to the office on Saturday?" she asked. "Yes, and please call me Dawn," I said. "There's not much else to do. TV is boring, I don't play golf, and the kids have their own things to do. What brings you here?" I saw her in a different light than before. Her slender body was not hidden under an ordinary business dress. Damn, what was I thinking? She must be 15 years younger than me. Well, I was training for a 10K, and I accidentally dropped my water bottle, and it broke. I was just a block away, and I thought I'd stop by for some water, if that's okay," she said with an angelic smile. I invited her into the kitchen and offered her water or a sports drink. She chose a sports drink, and so did I. We sat at the kitchen table and talked. I found out that her fiancé left her a few months ago for another girl, and a lot about her family. Thanks to office gossip, she already knew a lot about my situation. Seeing the sweat on her forehead and hands, I offered her a kitchen towel, and she said, "I guess I should go. I really need a shower." I don't know what came over me, but I said, "Well, you can take a shower here." Sherry smiled and said, "What about those sweaty running things?" I said, "I can throw them in the wash, and you can wear a robe while they wash and dry." For some reason, I hoped she would stick around. She smiled slyly and said, "What about your trip to the office? Will this ruin your plans? I don't want to keep you." I assured her that it was not a problem and I was happy to help. I walked her to the master bathroom, which had a large walk-in shower, then brought her one of my plush robes. Believing that I would be here for a long time, I took off my jacket and tie. Sherry came out in a robe and handed me her running clothes to throw in the wash, and I headed to the laundry room. I heard the water running, and my mind went back to the time Kelly and I were in the shower, and I heard Sherry's voice say, "Dawn, oh Dawn, can you come over here for a minute?" I ran up the stairs. I stood at the bathroom door and asked, "What's wrong, Sherry?" Suddenly, the door opened and Sherry, dripping water like Aphrodite emerging from the sea, pulled me into the shower. We ended up having to move to the bed as we ran out of hot water, damn it. We laughed like two schoolchildren. Sherry crawled under the covers, and I quickly ran downstairs and threw her clothes in the dryer, then returned to her at the speed of light. We made love. "Can I take you to dinner and dance?" I asked. Sherry playfully slapped my chest and said, "What, in my running outfit?" Smiling like a Cheshire cat, I said, "No, honey, I can either take you home to get dressed, or we can go shopping and I'll buy you a new outfit, whichever you like." She smiled slyly and said, "I think I'd like a new dress for my new boyfriend." New guy, I thought. Sounds pretty good. Damn what my kids will think. Then my mind said, screw them, it's time for me to be happy. I kissed Sherry and ran downstairs to get her clothes out of the dryer. We got dressed and I took her to the mall. She chose this black velvet wrap dress, a pair of open-leg tights, and a pair of 4-inch heels. You should have seen the looks I got from the older cashier when I paid. When I asked her if she wanted to go to Victoria's Secret, she leaned towards me and whispered, "You don't wear underwear with dresses like these." I can say we had a great time at dinner, and the dancing was an absolute delight. After the last dance, I said, "Sherry, I want to thank you for the most wonderful day I've had in a long time. I really don't want it to end." Sherry smiled and said, "Who says it has to end? How about you stop by my house so I can pick up some things and then come back to your place and pick up where we left off?" Looking at me with such a shining, beautiful look. I haven't felt this way since I first met Kelly. I told her it sounded great and we left. At dawn, we finally fell asleep, curled up together in complete contentment. I woke up around noon and Sherry was fast asleep, cuddled up against me. I needed coffee, so I put on my sweatpants and went to the kitchen to turn on the coffee maker. I had just poured a cup when I heard a car drive into the driveway and went to see who it was. It was Tommy, Casey, and the kids. I met them at the door, and the children all demanded a hug from their grandfather. We moved into the living room and Casey was talking about the job offer when Donald said, "Grandpa, who is this?" We all turned to see Sherry coming down the stairs in a pink tracksuit. Her smile made Tommy and Casey look at me and smile. I know I blushed. I introduced them and everyone hugged. I asked them to wait a little while we got dressed, and we took them out to the barbecue for lunch. Kelsey seems to have eaten more ribs than both of her brothers. Sherry was great with children, like a duck taking to water. As I was paying the bill, Tommy came up to me and said, "Dad, Casey thinks she's too young for you, but I don't know when I've seen you happier. As far as I'm concerned, go for it." He started to walk away, then came back and whispered, "Can I be your best man?" Damn it, I didn't even think about it. This was our first time together. Did they see something that I didn't? After lunch, we went to play mini golf. Damn, I laughed and enjoyed it so much. I realized that I missed spending time with my grandchildren and needed to spend more time with them. I also realized how beautiful Sherry was and wondered how she would feel about having an old man like me for a husband. We started dating, if you can call it that. We'd go out to dinner on Friday night and then end up at my house, making love and spending the weekend tasting wine, going to the theater, or finding other activities we both enjoyed. That doesn't mean we didn't rip out the sheets every time we could. She usually went home late on Sunday, and I saw her at work on Monday. I found out that she was actually 22 years younger than me, but she said she loved me and the age difference was that she didn't care. At Christmas, we all came together as a family. Sherry and I were planning our wedding in June. Just before lunch, Sherry pulled me aside and asked, "Honey, how would you feel about getting married on Valentine's Day?" A bit shocked as we had already booked the hall and made all the usual preparations. We had already designed the invitations, but hadn't printed them yet, luckily, so I kissed her and said, "My love, I thought you always wanted a June wedding. Why the sudden change?" She leaned close to my ear and said, "I'm 7 weeks pregnant." I picked her up and spun her around, kissing her as best I could. I'm almost 58 years old, and I'm going to be a father again. I loudly exclaimed, "Hooray!" And Donald and Nick ran up to me to find out what happened. I hugged them both, even though Donald was a tough one, and said, "Tell everyone you're going to have a new aunt or uncle soon, okay?" Soon we were surrounded by Tommy, Casey, Ronnie, Annette, and the kids. Everyone congratulated Sherry and me and started planning the wedding. I was over the moon. Sherry found a wedding dress that would reasonably conceal her pregnancy, and we got married in the park officiated by Annette, a licensed minister. After the wedding, we went to the banquet hall and were having a great time dancing and enjoying each other's company when Sherry walked up to the stage and took the microphone. "Don, my sweet husband, would you join me, please?" I did it. She continued, "I want to thank all the wonderful people who are here today to share in this wonderful event. As many of you know, or at least hope you know, I am pregnant. I'm 4 months along. I had an ultrasound yesterday, and my husband doesn't know who we are expecting, a boy or a girl." Silence reigned in the room. Now I was extremely excited, as were most of our friends. I stroked her small belly. One of Sherry's bridesmaids brought a rolled-up ultrasound, and Sherry untied the ribbon and asked me to open it. I looked at the picture and was trying to figure it out, and Sherry said, "See them?" Them, I thought. Sherry exclaimed, "It's twins, boys. We're having twins." The crowd erupted in cheers, cheers, and whistles. I kissed my new wife as everyone came to congratulate us. I always wanted a big family, but I never expected it to be so diverse. Sherry's pregnancy was relatively easy. We walked a lot and took Lamaze classes together. I appointed Carl, my second in command, to my position so I could spend more time with Sherry. I hired a new secretary and changed Sherry's title to personal assistant, keeping her on salary with a nice raise. I wanted her to have good social security. On June 27th, Benjamin Nelson and Samuel Carter joined the Wilson family. I cried as I watched my young wife hold our two newborn sons proudly for the photographer I hired. As I helped the photographer carry his equipment into the minivan, he turned to me, shook my hand, and said, "Don, you're a lucky guy. Don't ever forget that." I realized that I had been through hell and was now walking on the clouds of heaven. When I returned to the room, Sherry was inspecting our boys, completely naked. "What are you doing?" I asked. Sherry continued to look over the boys like Morgan Stanley did when he found David Livingston, then smiled and said, "Yes." I walked up to her, hugged her, and asked what interested her so much. Sherry said, "I was laying here wondering how the hell we were going to tell these two apart. They're like two peas in a pod. I was even thinking about getting them little tattoos, like C and D on their wrists." I nodded as all their facial and body features were identical. Smiling, Sherry gently lifted Samuel's right arm, and where the wrist connected to the forearm, there was a small black mole. Benjamin didn't have it. Sherry and I decided we didn't want to live in a house with bad memories, so we sold it and bought one of the largest motorhomes on the market. I also sold Foremost Insurance and Bonding. I kept my rental and rental properties, but hired a management company so I didn't have to deal with them. Sherry was still listed on paper as my personal assistant, so we were both technically working. We took our sons and traveled around the US and Canada. When Ronnie went to see Kelly, she told her that I had remarried and that Sherry had given me twins. That night, Kelly tried to commit suicide, but she was discovered in time. This only landed her in a psychiatric ward, where she was confined to bed at night for the next year. All her letters to me ended up in the trash. Warren Lagarde didn't do so well. He tried to be a tough guy in prison, but without his mercenaries like before, he pissed off the wrong people. He was dead. No one saw anything, or if they did, they didn't say anything. Sherry, the boys, and I spent the next few years traveling around the country trying to figure out where we wanted to settle. She began homeschooling the boys very early. After 5 years of RV living, I noticed she was tired, so we moved back to Larson, and I bought 20 acres of land outside of town and hired an architect to build our forever home. There were 2 lakes and several streams on the site. Our house had 3 floors, but knowing that I was getting old, I provided ramps, heated from the outside, and we installed 2 elevators inside. This time I decided to enjoy every moment with my little boys and spoil Sherry as much as she would allow. I was going to cherish every moment I was allowed to remain on this earth. I have a wonderful wife, wonderful children, now 9 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren. I can go to my grave a happy person. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.